In this video, I'm going to be making some benches for a donut slash coffee shop that I did some work for previously and just trying to match the existing millwork that's there. The overall construction of these benches is pretty simple. There's just going to be some 2x4 frames with plywood nailed to the outside and then some trim put around to add some detail to it. The first step was just getting the 2x4s cut down to size so that we could make the frames. As far as assembling the frames, nothing crazy needed to be done. Just gonna drill some pocket holes and use screws to attach everything together. During this process of joining all the pieces together, it made me consider that I might need to build a little bit larger workbench so I can have some more support. As you can tell, these bench frames overhang quite a bit, and that made for a pretty comical time trying to assemble this. Because I was needing to make 3 of these benches, I was able to get into a pretty good rhythm assembling these after I figured out the best way to do it with the first one. To finish up the assembly of the frames of these benches, I just needed to put some supports on the front and the top to add a little rigidity and give me some more material to nail into later on. The next step in the process was getting all the plywood cut down to the right sizes so that I could nail those onto the front and the sides, and then also to create the bench tops. I picked up this pre-milled maple lumber to match the maple plywood for the bench tops so that when I stain them, the color will turn out the same, and to provide a little protection for the edges of the plywood for the bench top. At this point, I either didn't realize my dust collector wasn't on or wasn't attached to the saw, so all this dust was just flying straight back into my face. To get the long panels cut down to the right size so they'll fit on the edges of the bench, I just used my track saw and cut these down to length. Once the frames were assembled and the plywood was cut down to size, the next step was just getting all of it nailed on. With a little forethought, I was able to put all of these nails in places that would be covered by the trim details, so there was no need to go back and cover any of these nail holes or try and worry about filling them. Once the plywood was taken care of, the next step was just getting all of the trim cut down to size and getting them nailed onto their respective sides. In order to make the front corners look the same, I just ripped 3/4 of an inch off the short sides of the trim so that when you add the 3/4 inch thickness of the trim on the front, they would look equal. I found that the back of my nail gun makes for a pretty good mallet when the trim is a little tight and I need to just tap it in place. When I was cutting the trim for the front of these benches, it was easier to cut them a little long, hold it up to the box itself, and then just mark a little referential measurement so that it would fit snug. I repeated this process for the rest of the benches, and then it was on to some of the more fine details. Here you can see that I bring the trim to the bench, make a little mark so it'll fit tight, and then use my hand as a mallet, just like my nail gun, to fit it in place. And some more mallet for you. The last bit of carpentry on this project was just nailing in all of these small pieces of trim, which if I were to do it again, I probably would try and join these 4 small pieces together and then set them into the opening instead of trying to cut them to size, because when it came time to fill nail holes and any sort of gaps, this became a little bit of a pain. When it came to making the bench tops, I decided it would be better to cut small strips of plywood like this and nail it on instead of doubling up the plywood, increasing the weight and the overall cost. And to make sure that the middle of the bench didn't sag at all, I did a little measuring and put a plywood support right here in the middle, and that will rest on the support that's in the middle of the bench frame. And same as making the bases of the bench, I had to go through the process of making the tops 3 times. As you can see, 2 of them already done in the background. My least favorite part of this project was going through and having to fill all of these nail holes and then go back and sand it all down so that it could be smooth. I also went through and sanded the bench tops up to 150 grit so that they would be nice and smooth once we put stain and finish on. You can tell I thought this was going to be pretty heavy by how hard I threw my head up when I was lifting the top. Guess I kind of forgot about the whole purpose of ripping those plywood strips and making the bench top lighter. Easily the most satisfying part of this project was putting this primer down on the bench for the first coat and then coming back later to put the other coats of paint down. A lot of thought went into the finishing process for this project because of how long these benches are and how big my shop is. So there was some musical chairs that went on, moving one bench from one table to one set of sawhorses in order to make enough space to paint all of these. While the coat of primer was drying on all the benches, I went through and could start applying some polyacrylic to the bench tops in order to give them some added protection. Choosing colors for this project was pretty simple since there was already painted surfaces in the coffee shop and we just wanted to match it. So they picked out the color from Sherwin-Williams called Rock Bottom. Here is a shot of the musical chairs I was talking about earlier. Once I finished spraying a bench with paint, I would move it out onto a workbench, and then once the space was free in the quote-unquote spray booth, I could move the next bench in and give it a coat of paint. This process made for a really nice impromptu workout. When all was said and done, the benches turned out great. The client really loved them. They fit in the space super well. And if you ever find yourself in Springfield, Missouri, stop by Parlor to get some coffee and some donuts.